Welcome back to my channel. This week I'm going to be talking about internal evidence of independence in a contemporary case. That is a case from outside the Bible. Next time I'll be picking a biblical example. I haven't chosen it yet, and giving an explanation of how that biblical example shows internal evidence of independence between two accounts. Now, you remember last time we talked about internal evidence of independence and external evidence. And what I said was that sometimes biblical critics think that the only thing that matters is external evidence. And if you think that the people knew one another or could have had access to each other or to what each other said, then they're not independent. But what I also emphasized is that the kind of independence we're looking for is independent information going back to the facts of what happened. And that can be true even for people who do know one another, even for people who talk about things. So you can't dismiss the concept of undesigned coincidences by saying, well, they knew one another, or they probably, they talked to one another after this, or anything like that. That doesn't automatically mean that the accounts cannot be independent in the relevant sense. So I'm going to give an example today. This is from the Saville Inquiry into Bloody Sunday. And you can Google that, find out a little bit more about it. Bloody Sunday was January 30th, 1972 in North Ireland, when some British soldiers shot some unarmed protesters in that terribly conflicted time in the history of North Ireland. And at first, the statement was made that, all the people who were shot had guns or, were attacking the soldiers and so forth, so that nobody innocent, in a sense, was shot. Well, that turned out not to be true. And eventually, over, a period of decades, these things were looked into. But one of the most famous, which began, I believe, in 1998, was called the Saville Inquiry. And it determined that quite a number of people were shot and killed who were unarmed, and I gather, obviously unarmed. I mean, not even, close. Okay, and so one of those people was named McGugan. Okay, so Barney McGugan was one of the people killed on Bloody Sunday, as the witnesses told it. He was trying to help somebody else who was hurt. And some witnesses even said that he was, waving like a white handkerchief to show that he came in peace, as it were, and yet nonetheless he was shot. Now, that part of it, the white handkerchief, is not what I'm talking about here today. But I want to talk about a soldier who was known as Soldier F. I gather their identities were to some extent kept low so that they wouldn't become the target of assassination attempts or whatever, especially when it turned out that they had done things that were wrong. So Soldier F apparently shot and killed Barney McGugan. And I want to talk about two testimonies about this. I'm getting this information ultimately from the book Bloody Sunday by Douglas Murray, but I haven't actually read the book. I'm getting it from a summary of some of this material by my daughter Bethel, who was really interested in this inquiry. And her Substack, by the way, is further up if you're interested in looking into that, reading some free content, possibly subscribing. Okay, so she wrote about this. There was one person who testified. At the time of Bloody Sunday, he was a teenager. His name was Joe Mann, M-A-H-O-N. He was lying still and playing dead, so he didn't have his head up watching what was going on, but he could hear. He lay there and he testified that he heard one of the troopers shout, "I've got another one." And then he heard, "We're pulling out, Dave." We're pulling out, Dave. Okay. Now, he didn't claim to have seen that exchange or what happened. Okay. But another person, another witness of the day named Joseph Doherty, he claimed that he actually saw Soldier F down on one knee shoot Barney McGugan. And then he recalls, quote, "The other soldier came back up to him and called him back. And after that, the two soldiers left together." Okay, so it's possible that these two witnesses, Mann and Doherty, knew one another. They were both there on the same day. They were on the same political side. They were both involved in that protest. And this was decades later, so they might have, if they knew one another, they might have talked about it. I certainly have no external evidence that they didn't know one another. I certainly have no external evidence that they didn't talk about what happened that day. Maybe they did, for all I know. But what we're looking for is that these testimonies are going back to what happened rather than one of them influencing the other. Even if they both intend to be telling the truth, if they both said, for example, that the one person was kneeling on one knee and shot, that they saw Soldier F kneeling on one knee and shooting, that would be very similar content. And if we knew they'd been talking to one another, we might wonder, understandably, if one of them said, "I saw him down on one knee shooting," and the other guy said, "Oh, yeah, he was down on one knee," and then told it as if he remembered that himself vividly, visually, even though he wouldn't have thought of him as being down on one knee. He wouldn't have thought of that at all if he hadn't heard of it from the other guy. Like, it might have been fuzzy in his mind what the person's posture was, but we don't find that. One of them is testifying what he heard, the other one is testifying what he saw. Moreover, there are things that are kind of damning, like, "I've got another one." I mean, it sounds awful, It's like you're shooting fish in a barrel or something. Okay, "I've got another one." But only one of the two witnesses tells about hearing that. "I got another one." Okay, so that doesn't look like collusion to make the soldiers look as bad as possible, right? And it's also, in a sense, damning to say, "Yeah, I saw that guy shoot Barney McGugan." I actually can recognize him, that visual testimony. So again, if they were colluding to try to make it, as damning as possible for Soldier F, you might expect that the other guy would say, "Yeah, I saw him shoot him too." Now, of course, multiple people could have really seen Soldier F, Dave, according to the one testimony, shoot Barney McGugan. That could happen. That could be true. But that would be a greater similarity of internal content. Instead of which, we find one of them saying, "I was lying down. I wasn't looking. I was pretending to be dead. And I heard the one say, 'I got another one.'" And then another voice saying, "We're pulling out now, Dave." Okay? And then the other witness says that he saw Soldier F go on one knee and shoot Barney McGugan, and then saw the other person come up and speak to him and call him back. I don't have here what he said they said. Maybe he just came up and called him back without any specific words, and they walked away together. I don't even know if he was close enough to hear what was said. Okay, maybe Joe Mann was closer. Okay, but either way, we have internal variation in these testimonies. Now, they're pretty brief. We find that in the Gospels and Acts accounts, you usually get even more information. What I have here that I'm giving you as an illustration is relatively brief. So ideally, you'd look for even more information, even more data showing independence. But as far as it goes, this internal variation is evidence of the relevant kind of independence. And it's internal evidence, even though these guys were not witness separated. I mean, there's no way that over, more than 20 years, you're going to say, now, don't you guys ever talk to one another? We're going to lock you up in separate rooms. And that's exactly the kind of thing that gets used against the Gospels all the time. And you'll see the dismissal of the argument from Undesigned Coincidences, because they'll say, well, there's a reason why police separate witnesses. Sure, ideally, if you can separate people, ideally, if you can guarantee that you have external evidence of independence and that they weren't speaking with one another, they had no opportunity whatsoever, unless they're clairvoyant, to know what the other person said, sure, you do that. And that, as I said last time, can decrease the need for internal evidence. The more external evidence and the more external independence that you have and that you can almost guarantee, the more similar the content can be, while still taking it to be multiply attested. But when you don't have that external evidence of independence, internal evidence can still allow you to count these as separate and complementary accounts of the same event. So next time I'm going to try to find a good Gospels or Acts example to show this same notion of internal evidence of independence, and why skeptics should not be able to just dismiss undesigned coincidences because these people knew one another, they weren't witness separated, and they had opportunities to talk. So this is a briefer video to introduce it and to show again that this is not special pleading for the Gospels, but rather is common sense applied to the investigation of history. Because that's what we do here at the Lydia Migrant Channel, where we're making common sense rigorous.